One of the things that we do as a policy council is we get to handle some really non-controversial issues. We've never had events on them because nobody wants to hear about them. It just takes 20 minutes and it's over. Another thing we have to do is deal with very controversial issues. How many of you have had this ideology affect your life in some way? Right. How many of you have seen this concept on the news or social media or anywhere else? Exactly, every hand. So we've all been either touched or we've seen everything that's been going on. You look at, many of you were following the Texas case. The jury said that the little 7-year-old boy was going to be custodied by his mom. She was transitioning him to a girl because she says that's what he wanted to be. So originally, the jury said mom gets custody. Then the judge overruled that and said it's joint custody. Dad, by the way, is saying no, James is a boy. So right now they have joint custody, joint medical decision power, and there's an update on this that we'll talk about at the end, but they have joint power now, custody over James. Then you see the athletics. Here you have CC Telfer competing against biological females. And the video was playing really slow, but you could see he was at least 10, 15 feet ahead. And then you may have seen scientists are saying things like the proper determinant of sex is gender identity. We've got professors who will sit in front of committees. We've got scientists who will sit in front of Congress and say things like that. So they'll say things like looking at the biological realities of the student, looking at their anatomy, looking at their chromosomes, should not override their gender identity when it comes to determining male or female. And then you see, if we can get this pulled back up, there's a chart of the increase of cases. One of the primary gender clinics in the UK, about I think it was 10, 15 years ago, they had about 30 boys, 40 girls. Now they're over 1,500 a year. In just that short amount of time, the graph literally just spikes straight up. So it's a crazy concept. John Stonestreet says it went in 10 years from unthinkable to unquestionable, is essentially what's happened. It's gone from unthinkable to unquestionable, but what's the deal? It's pretty simple, male and female, right? I see a lot of shaking heads, but if it's really that simple, why are you all here? The answer is because when you go past simple biologic male, female, yeah, that one's good. That's when it gets complicated. When someone is completely convinced with every fiber of their mentality that they're the opposite sex, what do we do? Why did that start? What caused it? How can we help them? That's when it gets complicated. And you've got the researchers who are looking at it, trying to figure it out. And they say, okay, so how prevalent is this? Well, some estimates say it's 1 in every 200. Other estimates say it's 1 in every 20,000. So it's either 1 in a room like this or 1 in Watertown. And you say, well, that's a really wide spread. The science must not be very settled on this. Exactly. And that's something that you'll see as we go forward. So there's going to be a lot we're going to go over today. It's going to be a little bit rapid fire on some of the things. But we want to start with, have any of you seen the pictures of the genderbread person? You seen that?
Gingerbread.
Yeah, genderbread person.
Oh, genderbread.
Genderbread, like the gingerbread man, but the genderbread person. So it's this picture of a gingerbread man, but it's the gingerbread person, and it's used in schools to explain all of these concepts. So to understand this topic, we're going to use things like that to really understand what they're talking about as we move forward. So on this little genderbread person, they draw symbols around the crotch area, and they label that sex. Like the anatomy you were born with, and chromosomes and things like that, that's your sex. And then they draw a nice little heart over the heart, there we go, of the genderbread person. That's who you're attracted to, a male attracted to a female, a male attracted to another male, etc. Then you go up to where they point to the brain, identity, what you know about yourself. You know you're a man, you know you're a woman, etc. Where you fit into society, how you act about it, things like that. And then you see the expression, where they have kind of the whole thing outlined. Your gender expression is the way you express your gender. I'm wearing a suit, I have short hair, I project as a male, things like that. That's your gender expression, the way you show people what's in your head. So that's a little bit of an explanation of what they mean by their terms, so we can use that as we go forward. But a key irony to this image was they used it for a short amount of time, but you know what they realized? This gender-neutral, genderbread person still looks too much like a man, so we have to change it. So they made the gender unicorn, which, ironically, unicorns don't exist. But we'll keep going. There is one thing that makes this image more accurate than the other one, though. What did they put in the crotch area? A DNA strand. So they're slightly acknowledging it's more than just what's in your pants. But now we get an idea of what they mean by your sex, your gender identity, and your gender expression. Expression is how you show what you feel in your head. So if your gender identity is different than your biological reality, what is that? Well, the stress you feel from that disconnect is called gender dysphoria, when someone is completely convinced that they're the opposite sex of what their body is. And it's not, I think on the back of the postcard we asked, are boys pretending to be girls or something like that? Most of the time, no. It's not that simple. Every fiber in their being tells them it's the opposite. So if we can know that we're a male when in reality we're a female, what does that say about us and reality? That we determine reality in our heads. So that's something we have to accept for the purpose of today's discussion, is that people believe we can define reality in our own heads, and that's real reality. So that's what we have to realize if we're going to move forward, that that's what they believe. So, gender dysphoria, again, we talked about that. That's the distress you feel when they don't match up. And it's not kids faking it. There's a lot of people in a lot of hurt over that distress. Gender stereotypes. This is something we've heard about. Does the left like gender stereotypes? No. So what is a gender stereotype? It's the whole structure of this is how a guy looks and should look. This is how a guy acts and should act. This is what a guy does and should do in society. Same for girls. This is what little boys like to do. This is what little girls like to do. It's this whole picture in our head of how guys and girls act, right? Does the left like that idea? No. So what they did, and I was reading an article just yesterday, they said we've exploded the gender boxes. Because anybody can do whatever they want. Which there's a little bit of truth to, right? Every lie has a piece of truth which allows us to hold on to it. Does every little boy need to play with trucks? No. Nope, not at all. Does every little girl need to like pink? No. Nope, not at all. So there was some validity to it, absolutely, that we should loosen up a little bit. But they totally blew the boxes up, right? So if the boxes are blown up, how do you define gender? Because they've told us you can't do it by biological reality. Man isn't male reality. Man isn't the gender stereotypes because we blew all those up. So what is it? It's just the belief that I am a man. Well, what is man? They can't give a definition for it because they've said biology doesn't count and the stereotypes doesn't count. So if I believe 100%, I know that I'm female and I'm going to act on that, what do I have to do to show that to you? I have to rebuild the gender boxes that my people just finished blowing up. That's how the girl can jump into the boy box. They have to rebuild the stereotypes, and that's what they're relying on. How do you know you're a boy? Well, because I like to play outside and I don't like tea parties. They have to jump back into that gender box that they hate, which is just a little bit ironic. So I added internal belief that wasn't on the previous box, because that's a big piece. They just know that they know that they know that that's the box they belong in. Go back. So one thing that I was reading, I think it was again yesterday, if they're saying biology doesn't matter, it's the I know that I know. Why are they so adamant about switching to the other side? About being in the other box, about having the surgeries, about things like that? It's another paradox that we see. One person phrased it, it's anatomical irrelevance versus anatomical yearning. They say both at the same time. My anatomy is irrelevant, but I have a strong yearning that I have to do the other anatomy. So it's another paradox that we'll see. So it's a little bit of the definitions of what it is, what we're talking about. It's the firm 100% belief, I know that I know that I know that I'm the other sex. What causes someone to do that, to have that belief? Well, as Ryan Anderson said, we must proceed with caution and humility. Why? Remember that statistic I started with, 1 in 100 versus 1 in 20,000? 1 in 200, 1 in 20,000. That's essentially where all of the research is right now. Can you trust either of those numbers, 1 in 200 or 1 in 20,000? Not really. So you just have to keep doing a bunch of studies, take the average, that's probably where we're at. So that's what we have to realize on a lot of the science behind gender identity right now, the causes, etc. So I have the top causes of gender dysphoria. A better title would have probably been correlating factors or contributing factors, because we don't know all of the causes, but contributing factors is too big to put on a slide. So we'll start with oversimplistic gender stereotypes. A 3-year-old boy, if you ask him what it means to be a boy, what's he going to tell you? Because I'm like dad, and I turn Pop-Tarts into guns, and because pink is dumb, right? That's about it. And they say up until about 4 years old, that's the depth of a child's understanding of male versus female. It's essentially just the stereotypes. They'll pick a couple things. You know, a girl doesn't like dolls, and pink isn't really her thing, so she thinks she's the boy. Right. Because at 3, that's all they know. So then you add to that, I was dealing with real small children. Next, social contagion. If we saw the graph at the beginning, I mean, it spikes. The left will tell you, yeah, because people now have a way to talk about their feelings that they've always had. It's maybe true for a small portion of people, but there's definitely a social contagion going on. They see that as a little bit contagious. The YouTube videos, things happening at school, things like that. Autism spectrum disorder. This is a big one that we have to clarify, causation versus correlation. Because it's not accurate to say autism causes gender dysphoria. What's more accurate is probably that students and children with autism spectrum disorder are more susceptible to the social contagion and to accepting an overly simplistic gender stereotype. Because the rates of autism are much higher within the transgender community than it is outside. So there's a correlation, but it's not accurate to say autism causes gender dysphoria. But it still belongs on the list because it's a piece to the puzzle. Childhood trauma. This is a big one. And it's one that we in the political world would like to forget about as we talk about this. Because it's policy, it's the right answer, it's how we move forward, it's what's best for society. And we have to realize there's hurting people. For example, one of the reasons this contributes to it, there's a bunch of different reasons. One of them is, so if a little girl is raped when she's real little and abused, there's several defense mechanisms that you can sometimes see occur, right? Sometimes she'll overeat because she believes that if she makes herself overweight, she won't be attractive to men and nobody will ever rape her again. It's this defense mechanism that she's convinced herself of. Another one would be sometimes you'll see them drive girls into becoming a lesbian because they never want to touch a man or those parts that abuse them ever again. It's a defense mechanism. If I'm never around a man and he never gets close to me, another man can't abuse me. And sometimes it's all subconscious, but it's another defense mechanism. Sometimes a defense mechanism in these kids is maybe if I get rid of these parts that were abused, it'll never happen again. Walt Heyer, who lived as a transgender woman from 42 to 50, I believe, it was 8 years, now back, comfortable in his male body, said that everyone he talks to, because he reaches out to people that are detransitioning all the time, they can all point to a time in their life when they stopped wanting to be who they were. A lot of times it's because of trauma. And it doesn't always have to be major sexual abuse level of trauma. We can go a little bit lower. For example, Walt Heyer's story is Grandma put him in a purple dress because she thought it would be fun. And Walt thought it was okay. I think he was maybe 7 or 8 years old. But anyways, whenever he'd go to grandma's, he'd put on the purple dress. Grandma would give affection, they would have fun, take the purple dress off and go home. So in his little brain, it was starting to get wired that when I act like a girl, people love me. Another therapist was telling a story of a little boy that came in that was convinced he was a little girl. So the therapist starts talking to the little boy and eventually gets down to, Mom and Dad just had another baby. Came home about 6-8 months ago. And the new little girl is getting all of the attention. Yeah, I mean, there's new demands on the family. Whether or not the family was actually neglectful to the little boy, I don't know. Could have just been more focused attention on the little girl. But in the little boy's mind, little girls get attention. Little boys get left to the side and have to go clean their room. So if starting with little kids, it doesn't have to be dramatic trauma that starts the wheel spinning. Misdiagnosed homosexual attraction. Roughly half of those who detransition identify with homosexual attractions. What this looks like is, for example, a male feeling attraction to other males, doesn't feel that that's right. So, well, if I'm that attracted to males, I must be a female. And that's what starts it. And the vice versa as well. So a lot of times there's misdiagnosed homosexual attraction. Then the last one, which is, I don't have statistics on how prevalent this one is. It's more with the older population than with a 3-year-old, obviously. But transvestic disorder or autogynephilia. Transvestic disorder is oversimplified, which a lot of today is going to be oversimplified because we don't have the time for all of it. But a sexual fetish with women's clothing, with dressing up, with things like that. That's how sometimes it starts. The cross-dresser that continued going further. Autogynephilia, gynephilia, attraction to female, auto, self. They're attracted to the idea of themselves as female. They put on clothes, they put on women's clothing, makes them feel good. Sometimes it's sexually arousing. It's a strain of some of the people that are caught up in this, is transvestic disorder and or autogynephilia. Now, those are some of the contributing factors. Don't take that as an exclusive list, because they're still coming up with, man, this looks like it's helping the contagion as well. But that gives us a little bit of an idea of what's causing it. Notice what's not on this list. Ambiguous genitalia. Because as soon as this topic comes up, the left will bring that up. Well, what about the kids who, when they look in their pants as little kids, it looks like both? That proves that it's all fluid. Well, disorders of sexual development, what those are called, the prevalence of those are the two statistics I've seen. It's either 1 in 1,000 births or 1 in 5,000 births. That is, the child is born with some sort of anomaly or ambiguous genitalia or things that just, it's not all a clear picture. That's the prevalence of a DSD. Of those 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 5,000, doctors diagnose it with high, accuracy. They get it right most of the time. So, most people with DSDs don't identify as transgender. Most people that identify as transgender don't have a DSD. So saying that that's the account for what's going on is totally shooting the breeze. It's not accurate at all. But it'll come up, and now you know. Next, so we know some of the definitions. We know some of the causes. Let's talk about the treatments. There's about 4 or 5 different treatment plans, different variations, things like that. But essentially, they all break down into 2 buckets if we generalize. Either you affirm the child and their belief, or you affirm the child but don't affirm their belief. Those are essentially your 2 options. And then there's sub-options within that. So we'll start with the first one, affirmation of the child and the belief. Which we're told, if you don't do the first one, the kid's going to kill themselves. Right? That's what you're told. If you bring your child to a gender clinic and they express feelings of gender dysphoria, the doctor's going to probably prescribe hormones, or if they're younger, like a hormone blocker or a puberty blocker, they're going to say, hey, if you don't go along with this, you could drive them into suicide. If you as a parent who know nothing about the issue are told that, what are you going to do? You're going to do whatever it takes to keep your kid healthy and flourishing, right? So that's why a lot of people get sucked into it. So let's look at the first option, affirmation of the child and the belief. So starting as young as 3, you've got the social transition. We're talking about clothing, we're talking about maybe a name change, things like that. 10 plus, which is actually, I think, starting a little younger than 10 now, is puberty suppression. I believe Lupron is the drug they usually use, which is a drug that if a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old or something like that is showing signs of going into puberty, is that going to be healthy for the child? No. So they developed this drug to delay puberty until, 11 or 13 or whatever they determine is appropriate for that child, right? So that's what the drug was designed for. When little kids start showing signs of puberty way too early. So they said, hey, even though it's not FDA approved for this, let's give it to a 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old and just hit pause on the puberty. So let them figure it out for a while. So after you hit pause on the puberty with the suppression, then 12 plus cross-sex hormones. You start giving a girl testosterone, etc., which then they'll start to see the biological changes. She will start to get facial hair, stuff like that. His muscles will start to diminish a little bit. One of the students actually says, when he's running track against the girls, even though he's like 8 inches taller, that he's at a disadvantage. Which sounds absolutely crazy, but to him it feels like a disadvantage because he can feel the puberty or the cross-sex hormones diminishing his strength a little bit and changing his body. That's what he means by that. He's inaccurate completely, but he can feel it taking effect. Then 14 plus, which is actually now, I think they started doing it at 12, is surgeries. There's little 12-year-old girls, little 13-year-old girls getting double mastectomies. Because hey, if you change your mind later, you can just go back and get breasts. That's what people are saying though. I know you can't. They're telling these kids, we'll cut them off now, and if you want them back later, we can give them back. So let's go into a few of the details of these treatments. So social transition, name, dress, pronouns, greatly reduces desistance, difficult to detransition, socially contagious. Puberty suppression, Lupron. It's used off-label. It's not approved for the way they're using it. That pause button that they say this will just give them more time to think, they're arresting bone development, they're arresting brain development, they're arresting genital development. That just doesn't just come back as soon as you stop. So they say it's a pause button, but you've actually stopped that kid's growth. Puberty is oftentimes what brings them back around to realizing who they are. Now add to that, almost 100% going to cross-sex hormones. So you put the little kid on blockers. One of the studies, all 70 kids signed up for the cross-sex hormones. Cross-sex hormones, you're going to see some changes, major changes in the body. Sometimes with the puberty suppression, the kid is sterile. But after cross-sex hormones, if you've done both, we were getting almost a guarantee the kid's going to be sterile. What little 4-year-old knows how to make that decision? No long-term data on the effects. Then the surgeries, which we can change back later if you want them. Now here's how these different 4 stages are presented to a parent and to society. Take step 1. If it works and you decide to go to step 2, we'll take step 2. It's totally independent. If step 2 works and you want to keep going, we'll take step 3. Your decision at that point. The problem is they reaffirm each other. And they reaffirm the delusion. If you take a little boy who's stressed about being a little boy, wants to be a little girl, and you start treating him as a little girl, is he going to be happier? A lot of times, yes. Parents will say it's instant change. As soon as we started letting him wear like pink and yellow and let him grow his hair a little longer, he was just so much happier. Guess what? If you take his math homework away, he's going to be happier too. So if you take something out of someone's life that is causing them stress, will they have less stress? Yes. So it looks like it's working. Now, on top of that, take the puberty suppression. Little boy doesn't feel like he fits in with all the other little boys. He goes on puberty suppression. All all of his buddies hit puberty. They start getting taller, their voices get deeper, their muscles get bigger, they start being more athletic, etc., etc. Is he going to fit in better or worse with his smaller frame and partially developed everything? Worse. So it increases chances of the cross-sex hormone, the etc. Add to that, if this is because of trauma, if this is what they see as their way out, their path forward to a better life, and they're down to step 2 and the doctor says, do you want to try step 3? What are they going to say? Their hope is placed in this. Of course I want step 3. Get me out of where I was. So they keep going. Now, after that step 4, after the surgeries, are they happier? Usually. Yep. It's been seen sometimes after, like, Walt had somebody a week after the surgery express regret, but usually after the surgery, things are great for about 5 years. It's called the honeymoon period. After 10 years especially, they really start seeing negative mental health. In Sweden, the best study they've done long-term, 10, 15 years after surgery, in an environment that's very affirming, Sweden will give them everything they want and say everything the way they want it. 19 times higher rate of suicide. So when the doctor tells the parent, if you don't transition your kid, they're going to kill themselves, is that accurate? No. A lot of the studies on this issue have a 30 to 60% loss to follow-up. 30 to 60% of the people that were in their study at the beginning, when they went to follow up, they couldn't get a hold of them. They say if it's anything over 20%, your study is really compromised. Most of these studies are in the 30 to 60% loss to follow-up. There's no good long-term data on what all of this does to a person. Sounds like a great option, doesn't it? So next we go on to affirmation of the child, but not the belief. You don't put the little boy in a dress. You don't make him play with trucks either. If he doesn't want to play with a truck, you don't shove him in the mud. But you don't let the little boy put on a dress. You have flexibility in what they call the gender stereotypes. If the little boy would rather paint than go play football, that's fine. That's totally fine. Healthy friendships. They said if you get that little boy with other little boys that have similar interests, maybe the only other 2 friends he has are really rough and tumble, and he just doesn't feel that way. Get him with other little boys that think like he does, and he maybe start to realize, oh, okay, I do fit in. And then talk therapy. Go see a therapist, go see a pastor, things like that. One of them explained their methods. It was they talked to a little boy. They said, okay, why do you think you have a girl brain? It was because everything in my brain is a girl brain. It was okay, well, tell me what you mean by that. Draw me some pictures. So he gave the boy a pink crayon and a blue crayon. He said, start drawing things that are in your brain. And he drew this thing and that thing and this thing and that thing. And he circled the blue ones with the things that are boy things in his brain, and the girl ones with pink. And he goes, see, there's a lot of pink things. I think it was a majority of pink things in my brain. I have a girl brain. Okay. So they kept talking, kept meeting. The guy kept talking with the little kid. They kept drawing things. What do you like? What do you not like? What do you do? Eventually, because the little boy would do the drawing each time. Eventually, the little boy saw he's got all these blue things on his picture of his brain and a couple little girl things, what he sees as girl things. So the little boy helped himself, the psychiatrist was helping him through it all. Oh, okay, I don't have a boy brain. I don't have a girl brain, I have a boy brain. That kind of stuff, the left wants to be illegal. Remember the California therapy bans, what's called conversion therapy? That's what they want to make illegal. And it's 11 states, I believe, don't quote me, it's illegal for a paid professional to do that kind of talk therapy. Because they say it's abusive. Now, if you go through this and you don't transition the kid, maybe take them to therapy, maybe don't, what are your chances of that kid desisting and becoming comfortable in their biological sex? 85% chance. Don't send them to the gender clinic. Don't put them on the blockers. 85% chance. Some studies say it's 60. Most of them say 70 to 85. One study said 98%. But 85 is kind of where a lot of people are landing. So those are kind of the 2 options for treatment of what do we do to help this person. So next we'll move on to law and policy. So we've already mentioned SOGI on therapy. How many of you know what SOGI means? Sexual orientation, gender identity. They're asking for those protections in law. You shouldn't be able to fire someone just because they're gay. You shouldn't be able to deny someone an apartment just because they're transgender, things like that. Sounds great, that's fine. Problem is, with this issue, if you add gender identity, for example, to a school board policy at a local tech school, what that turns into is it's in policy that you can't disagree with that identity in any meaningful way. They label any disagreement as discrimination. If you want to have a restroom policy and you disagree with somebody's identity, it's discrimination. So that's one of the reasons why that's a bad decision moving forward. If you'd like to know more on that specifically, on our back display, we have a piece from Heritage, how those ordinances and laws will affect all the different areas of society. It's a real well put together piece, just a whole bunch of bullet points, each area of society, how adding that to policy would be harmful.
Like dictate pronouns that you would have to use.
Taken to an extreme level, they dictate pronouns. Yep. There's a professor that lost his job over it. Yep. So, next, which we already talked about a little bit. Oh, that's a good one. Glad I had it on the slide, not my notes. Harris v. EEOC. How many of you have been following this case? Didn't think so. That's okay. It's kind of an obscure one. It's dealing with a funeral home. Christian owned. Starting to ring bells. There we go. What happened is, male employee now identifies as female. Talks to the boss, says, I want to come to work now wearing a lady's skirt suit instead of a man's pantsuit. Said, okay, thank you for telling me. I'll talk to, I don't remember if he said talk to his wife, have to think about it, but he got back to the employee and said, no, that's not going to work. We're a Christian organization. We believe you were created a male. We're going to operate our business that way. And so our dress code is going to be based on your biological sex, not what you identify as. He wouldn't follow the dress code. He was let go. He filed suit claiming gender discrimination. They fired me because I'm transgender. South Dakota actually signed on to this case several years ago. Marty Jackley put us on it. So it was totally behind the scenes at the time, but he saw the importance of, okay, we got to realize that the law says sex, not gender identity. So several weeks ago, the Supreme Court heard this case along with two others, all on the same day, all dealing with the idea of when Congress wrote laws about sex, did they mean gender identity too? Harris v. EEOC, the briefs that we're on, the briefs that South Dakota's on are saying no. When Congress said sex, it meant sex, biological realities. So that one we're waiting on a ruling here. We don't know when. We've already talked about the conversion therapy. So you remember the whole like talking with the student, working through things. Hey, did you have trauma in your life? People will tell stories of when I went into the clinic, nobody asked me questions about what my previous past was. Nobody discussed anything. They said, okay, you want to identify? Here's your puberty blockers. They just said, okay, you identify as that, let's go. There's a lot of states that have, and more that want to, make it illegal for a professional to talk students through this with the potential of becoming comfortable with their biological reality. Parental rights and custody battles. Ohio, you may have seen, what was it, a year ago now, something like that. Parents lost custody over their daughter because they wouldn't transition her. Court gave custody to the grandparents who were okay with the transition. She was in their custody, went forward with it. Actually got to meet them about 6 months ago. It's really cool. Then Texas, the James Younger case. They first gave it to mom, who was going to transition him, says it's a little girl. Then they said joint, so you have to both agree before you can do treatments. As of, I think, less than a week ago, James went to school dressed as a boy for the first time in his life. He's not going to be transitioned, at least it looks like for now. He finally got to go to school as a boy. And then we see athletics. So we sort of saw the videos at the beginning of the males competing against biological females. It's an issue we've been talking about in South Dakota. It's an issue that the nation's been talking about. And how many of you know who Selena Soul is? Probably didn't pronounce that right. She's the girl out of Connecticut who lost a spot in finals because of two boys. And so her and several other girls got with the Alliance Defending Freedom. They're filing suit with the Department of Education claiming Title IX sex discrimination. We are girls. We were kicked out of girls' sports by boys. So that's in front of the Department of Education, waiting to hear back from that as well. So two big pieces of national news that there's potential for progress on. Then, when we saw in South Dakota, I'm sure you guys saw those as well. Last year, year before, I think the last 4 years, we've had bills on that come to the Capitol, saying that boys should compete against boys and girls should compete against girls. So, let me check real quick. Now we know a few of the definitions, a few of the causes, a few of the treatments, some of the impact on law and policy, but now I want to get into how we respond. And I chose the word respond very intentionally, because we have to respond and not react. We have just about 10 minutes left here. What's the difference between respond and react? If you swing at me, I'm going to duck. If something happens and I make a plan and move forward with it, I've responded. That's key. How many things today have I told you that are shocking or upsetting, or you're just sitting there like bamboozled? Exactly. We have to respond, not just react. Along these lines, all of you didn't know this, but when you walked through the door, you signed an invisible contract. You know what that contract said? You weren't going to talk to anybody in any deep manner about this topic for 24 hours. Because I know you're all, or half, like, what is going on with this? That contract also said, you're not going to discuss it on Facebook for 48 hours. I say it as a little bit of a joke because we really need to think about this before we say things. We have to respond to this. Because again, boys aren't just pretending to be girls. People are hurting. So how do we respond? I think the biggest thing we need to do is identify who the actual opponent is. If we're going to fight something, you got to know what you're fighting. If you're going to stand up for something, you got to know what you stand for. So this isn't meant to be an exhaustive list, but this is what came to my mind. Who is our actual opponent? It's a psychological condition that has a grip on people's minds. Right? Is a transgender person our opponent? No. Is the belief that has a grip on their mind our opponent? Yes. Will telling that person, check your pants and get over it, help their psychological condition? Not at all. I saw something on Facebook a while back. Maybe the person meant well, but they said if somebody ever identifies as a woman and follows my little girl into the restroom, I'm going to identify as the tooth fairy and knock his teeth out. Is that helpful?
I'm sorry.
Here's the thing we got to realize. They actually think we hate them. If we post stuff like that on Facebook and talk about things like that, we've given them reason to believe it. Evidence against us. Next, policy proposals. Things that come to the Capitol, things that come to a school board. Is that our opponent? Yes. You can stand up very reasonably, very passionately, say why this policy proposal, that vote is good or bad. Take a firm stand. Hardcore, even if people yell at you. Because that's the opponent. The policy agenda that's coming against us. We also know that there's a funded agenda. If 25 people show up to the Capitol passionate about something, are they necessarily the opponents? Or is it the person who rented the buses and convinced them that they needed to go to the Capitol? And ultimately, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. If the devil can get a grip on somebody's mind, and we try to stand against that, it's going to happen. If they're running from trauma, if they're trying to bury a painful past, one thing we got to realize, if we tell them their new identity is fake, and they have to go back, What they hear is, I have to go back to all that pain. Are they going to respond well to that? No, I believe, that's just my opinion, I believe that's part of why we see such a vitriolic response when we challenge their identity. Because they know if that's not real, all that pain is just going to come right back. So we have to identify the actual opponents. So, this is what society will tell us. It's either love or truth, right? Either you love them and you're going to accept their identity, or you're going to speak the truth and it's going to hurt them. Is that true? Is it an either or? Does it look more like this? Yes, this is much better. It's been said that love, in a shallow way, love without truth is what? Heresy. It's shallow, it's useless. Love without truth is heresy. Truth without love is brutality. So love and truth is the better way to move forward. Love the person, speak truth, and stand up against the opponents that we lined out. But love and truth, I think we can actually improve it a little bit better. Because this is even, there's traces of accepting the idea that loving them means doing what they want to hear. A real, wholesome, robust understanding of love. Will it speak the truth into someone's life? Yes. Love that. We need to have love that speaks truth. Love that shows compassion. Love that turns the other cheek when they call you a hateful, homophobic bigot. Especially for the elected leaders. They get it. Coming from all directions when they stand up against this. Love that rescues and love that protects. Sean and Josh McDowell have given me the best definition of love that I've ever seen. And that was, so Josh McDowell travels all over the nation, right? He said he'll talk to thousands of pastors in one meeting and ask for a definition of love. Because I've only had a couple people in all my years give me a definition. Most of them go into some version of love is patient, love is kind. He goes, no, that's what love does. What is love? For us to grab onto. I believe he gets it from Philippians, but he said the best definition is nourish and cherish. If you love someone, you're going to seek to nourish them and cherish them. Apply that to this issue. Does giving a child puberty blockers nourish them? No. Does telling someone to check their pants cherish them? No. So I believe that's a good filter for us to look through. I want to nourish this person and cherish this person. Some people who have detransitioned will tell stories of people from their past who said things in a very simple way that they absolutely hated. Like eventually, Jim, God didn't create you to be a woman, and it was something similar like that, and they would say it repetitively. They said, I hated it. But eventually, when I started questioning everything again, it rang in my head. So sometimes the truth is going to hurt, but if it's done in a loving way, to nourish and to cherish, it's okay that they got mad. If we speak up on this, are we going to make enemies? Yes. If you speak the truth, you're going to make enemies. If you're making enemies, does that mean you're speaking the truth? No, not necessarily. We've almost developed the habit of, I made somebody mad, so I must have said something right. You've seen the attitude in people, right? We can't have that. If we know we've spoken the truth and someone got mad, then we can say, okay, maybe I stepped on the devil's toes there. That was good. But just because somebody was mad or hurt doesn't mean we spoke the truth. So love that. Nourishes and cherishes and speaks truth and shows compassion. And I believe that's the way we move forward. So we have just like 2 minutes left. At the back table, hot off the press, they literally had to rush shipping. They got to the office yesterday. 66-page book put together by the Minnesota Family Council, the Minnesota version of our organization. It was endorsed, let's see if I can go, by these organizations. The Family Policy Alliance, one of our partner national organizations, is endorsed by the Heritage Foundation. It was endorsed by the Kelsey Coalition, which is a non-political group of parents who are dealing with this issue in their children. Parents of ROGD kids, rapid onset gender dysphoria, same thing. Non-political, Democrats and Republicans, just parents dealing with this, have endorsed the book. Wolf has endorsed the book. How many of you know who Wolf is? Because we don't run in their circles. It's a radical feminist organization. They think killing babies is needed for society. But they also think that woman means something. We have allies. And you say, well, why don't we hear about them? Same reason they didn't hear about us. They're being silenced. This book I also want to read. So this is who it's been officially endorsed by. Then inside, you'll see a whole bunch of endorsements from individuals. Sleep professional counselors, former transgender men, multiple endocrinologists, attorneys, pastors, the founder of the Toronto Gender Clinic, the Jewish lesbian feminist, the Family Research Council, American College of Pediatricians, Focus on the Family, the Respect Life Office at Catholic Charities, Archdiocese of Denver, North Star Law and Policy Center, and the National Catholic Bioethics Center. They got everybody together. It's 66 pages of most of the current research. We have about 50 copies on our back display. More will be coming later, but they can only rush ship some of them. But if you go to genderresourceguide.com, you can download the whole thing for free. So if you want a physical copy, we have about 47 of them left at the back. Otherwise, you can take a picture of the screen, write it down. There's a little display on the back with the link as well. You can take a picture or write it down. genderresourceguide.com if you want more information on the issue. It's got the statistics, it's got model policy, a model letter to your school board, how to handle the whole issue, as well as the endorsements you heard at the beginning. So that's the long and short of it. And everything I've talked to you today, each bullet point could have been its own 5-hour lecture. I'm not kidding. Just Google it on Heritage, you'll instantly see 5 hours worth of video. But there's one thing I want to close with. I know we're at time, but I want to tell you guys about this. A few years ago, one of the activists on this issue came to the Capitol, testifying against, I believe it was what they called the bathroom bill at the time. They identified as the opposite sex, said the bill was hurtful to them, came and testified, etc. Shortly after, one of the representatives reached out to them, started developing a friendship, and then pulled in us in as well. Scott, Dale, and I, and multiple others. This person could not believe that we as Christians would love them. They were totally shocked by it. Does that hurt? They committed suicide about a year ago. Does that hurt? If we don't handle this right, we could literally be pushing people away from the gospel. Does that hurt? Because it should hurt a little bit. Granted, I'm not saying we're more powerful than God. If he's going after somebody, we can't step in the way. But we've got to be careful how we handle this. If they honestly believe that we hate them, we can't give them any reason to, and we need to prove them wrong. We need to love them, because a lot of times we're dealing with hurting people that need to be loved. So thanks for coming today. Grab a book if you'd like a physical copy. Otherwise, you can download it at genderresourceguide.com.